Hello, everyone, and welcome to the pre-meditation talk for our Catalyst meditation for our weekly Catalyst meditation for this week. And It's kind of a strange moment. It's the beginning of the month, and it's also a holiday coming up. And I'm going to try to address a couple of those things. Um, But before I do that, I want to read a quote to you. And it's kind of fun because I woke up with this quote and I was trying to remember where I had seen the quote. And so I'm looking online, and unfortunately, the quote is by Thomas Berry, and this man he was a font of quotes, and so there was tons and tons of quotes by Thomas Berry, but none about the nature of story, but not exactly the one I was looking for, and I knew Thomas Berry, not for long before he passed on. Um, and I therefore want to find a quote. Make a long story short, the quote is in my book. I had to go into my book and say, "Oh, it's sitting right there." Um, Let me read this to you. Well, let me actually share this with you. And it says, "It's all a question of story. We're in trouble just now because we are in between stories. The old story, the account of how the world came to be and how we fit into it, sustained us for a long time. It shaped our emotional attitudes, provided us with life purpose, energized action, consecrated suffering, integrated knowledge, guided education. We awoke in the morning and knew where we were. We could answer the questions of our children. But now it is no longer functioning properly, and we have not yet learned the new story." Well, we have been on the brink of a new story for a long time. Um, and unfortunately, many of us have not recognized the importance of story, and also not recognized what story is supposed to mean to us, and we keep thinking that we've got a story, or we are acquiring a story when we're not. Um, as Thomas Berry said, the old ones aren't working anymore. Um, and what we think of as the beginnings of a new story is not one. Um, Most of the so-called new stories are rehashed versions of the old ones. So in instead of having um, capitalism and communism, we've got neo-capitalism and neo-communism and even neo-anarchy. And that the rehashed versions of the stories that did not work, that we know they don't work, is not giving us a new story. It's giving us another chance to try to resurrect an old story. Or we spend our time talking about what we don't want. We put energy into what we don't want, and the those stories start looking like anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-colonialism, anti-fascism, anti-anti, as though making the statement of what we don't want gives us what we do. Doesn't work that way. Um, saying what you don't want doesn't tell me what you do want. And then people get really, really surprised when the time that they've invested in the anti-story doesn't yield any level of satisfaction in their lives, doesn't yield any level of connection in their lives. And this is a little bit sad because, as I said, I knew Thomas Berry very tangentially. I knew him through a lot of the people I was working with at that particular time. And so I had an opportunity to have a few personal conversations with him. And his life was difficult. And um, uh, I'm trying to capsulate this part of his life without going into his personal stuff. But he was having the kinds of difficulties that a person of his age and his physical, or I should say, lack of physical stamina was having. And nothing that either we're not facing, that we're facing, or we're going to be facing sometime in the very near future. And he wasn't handling it very well. And so he needed somebody to help him handle it. And he did not have that. And he was reaching out to people to get us to help him. And we couldn't do it. I'm on the other side of the United States. And those who are close by didn't want to do it. So here's Thomas Berry, one of the most brilliant people in of our time, who um, at the time he passed was living, let's just say, a life that he didn't want and I wouldn't want for anyone. So his this quote, "It's all a question of story." That quote applied to him. It's a question of story, and he didn't have one. When I see the people, pitching their tents, the weather's getting good in Portland, and people are out there pitching their tents out on the street where they live. Those people pitching their tents don't have a story. I don't have a story for them. We have to come up with one together, and we haven't done that yet. So as I said earlier, um, old stories aren't working. The new stories are just rehashed versions of the old stories, or are the anti-equivalent of the old stories. Um, you know, because I am uh, anti-capitalist. It means that doesn't tell me what I'm to do today. How do I function today? Okay. Something happened to me, I guess about a year or so ago. Um, Went out to get in my car to go somewhere and found that somebody had spray painted my car. And I remember standing out there for a while looking at it like, what do I do right now? It's like you don't generally go out to your car and find that somebody's tagged your car. And um, first thing I thought of was, who did I piss off? And I don't piss people off, or not enough to make them want to tag my car. And it was one of these unintelligible scrawls, and it matched the scrawl near there's a utility box where I park, and somebody had spray painted the utility box, and they decided, like, I got a little bit more paint left. Let me paint the doors of this guy's car. And I realized, and I was thinking about this at that time, that whoever did that did not have a story. What he or she had was a can of paint, um, up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and had nothing else to do but paint my car. Um, our lives are being dictated by our lack of story. Our lives are being dictated by our lack of community. Whoever painted my car had nothing else to do and had no connection or no um, level of community with me. All they saw, they didn't even see my car. They just saw an object that they could spray paint. Um, my brother and I used to do something. Um, we would uh, get um, okay, uh, get a package of beans, and they had to be a certain kind of bean that would fit into a straw, um, so that you could then blow these beans through a straw and hit people, bean them, hit people on the walking down the street. But you didn't want to get people walking down the street because you may not be able to run faster than them. So we go wait till we went to our grandmother's house, and she lived on a bus line. And when the bus was about to take off from the stop sign, we would pepper the side of the bus with this mouthful of beans we had. These were machine gun beans here. So we're blowing a mouthful of beans and people getting hit by wet beans. They were not happy, and my brother and I were ecstatic because we were having fun. Too bad those folks weren't having any fun. And this is something that um, a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old could have fun. We didn't damage anybody. Maybe damaged a little bit of pride by getting hit with a soggy bean. Um, but when you're doing that as an adult, when you're still doing that, when you're not doing anything else, then there is a problem. And the problem is this issue of story, the quote that I read from the beginning. Uh, so, bad stories, having a bad story will yield bad results, and you have to be responsible for the bad results that are being generated because you're not generating a good story. So most of what I am seeing in the world now that goes for, um, and there's a whole community or whole, I won't call it a community, a whole gathering of people around bad stories. Um, the most recent one being the demonstrations that were headed up by the phrase "No Kings." And uh, it's one of those things where you look at it and say, yeah, nobody, I don't want a king. Nobody here wants a king. If you asked the people who you were opposing, they'd say, yeah, we don't want a king either. And so it's not something that gives you anything. It doesn't tell you what you want. Um, Years and years ago, there was another bad story that was called 4 Years Go. And some of y'all might remember this. This is uh, an interesting concept. And it said, we all know what we want. We know the kind of society we want to live in, and we can approach this as we approach a campaign, political campaign. Give ourselves 4 years, like from the start to the culmination of a political campaign, and let's do this effectively, seriously, and we can live in a new society in 4 years. Okay, give ourselves 4 years. Go. Well, it went nowhere because the basic concepts of what we want in a society wasn't there. We didn't know what we want. We didn't have an idea of what we want. We had a great idea of what we didn't want. And I forget who the president of the time was, but you didn't want that guy. And that was about all we had. And so our challenge is um, in all these threads and themes that we hear, how do we actually live our lives? How do we live our lives as though we've got to get to Mars? How do we live our lives um, if my goal is to make America great again? So our challenge is not only how do we live our lives, but how do we create the systems and structures that will govern our lives in this framework, in this concept of our story? How do we come up with a really viable story? Um, um, Now, for the past 40 years, and clearly for the past 30 years, my story has been, the Commonway story has been worn as a button, which is creating a world that works for all. It's on the button, it's on the book, we've got um, a notion of what that means. And if we choose to live that story, and that's a choice, and a lot of people aren't making it. But if we choose to live that story, we've got a story that gets me out of bed every morning. It will identify what we want. It'll identify what we don't want. It will identify how we pull ourselves together, um, how we govern ourselves in this in-between state between leaving what we don't want, getting what we do want. Václav Havel, the former dissident and former president of the Czech Republic, and one of my main um, mentors, co-theorist, whatever you want to call us, said, when you're getting up out of the bed and getting started with your day, at some point in time, you're getting your pajamas off, and at some point in time, you're getting your street clothes on, and at one point, you are not ready for the bed, and you're also not ready for the street. So you're in this in-between state. You don't live there Okay, so at some point in time, you get all of your pajamas off, you put all your street clothes on. But while you're in this in-between state, you're not ready for anything. And that's where we are right now. And so, what our challenge has to be is what is it that's going to prepare me to live in this other state? I can tell you now that focusing on the problem won't do that. Focusing on the problem gives you more problem. We keep acting like the laws of attraction don't work for us, or we have an exemption from that. So we can talk bad about Trump or we can talk bad about anybody, and it doesn't really apply to us. And then we find out, oh, yes, it does. We keep getting more Trump and we keep getting more of the problems that we're talking about. One of the things that we have to focus on is the nature of the society that we're creating. I'm clear, and I've been clear through 8 or 9 different writings now, that we are talking about a spiritual society, but a very specific kind of spiritual society. We're talking about a spiritual society that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with religion. And one of the things that I've been working to do is trying to um, uh, wedge apart these two concepts, which have some relationship to each other, but also don't have a relationship to each other. Um, for ex a person can be a deeply religious person and have no spiritual life whatsoever. And their whole religions now that are almost completely devoid of spirituality. Similarly, we can have a very rich spiritual life, but not have a particular religious expression in our lives. And so um, I'm very clear, and the Dalai Lama is also clear that a call for a spiritual society is not a call for a religious society. Um, I'm also clear that we're in the middle of a profound transformation, a true metamorphosis, a metamorphosis. Um, Getting ourselves from the caterpillar to the butterfly through the goo, um, and getting ourselves creating new institutions, creating new um, ways of looking at the world. I think I mentioned this last time. I was talking to my grandson who's um, in college, and I asked him what his major was going to be in college, and he says political science. And I went, well, I didn't say it quite this blatant to him, but what a waste of time. Okay, listening to the theories of these old, dead, white males. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with being any of those things. It's nothing wrong with being old or dead or white or male. But if that's all you're listening to, that's a problem. Okay. And um, I mean, the theories of Hobbes and Locke and all of the rest of them. Yes, I took courses there. Um, doesn't tell you what you have to do today. It doesn't tell you how to govern the behavior of somebody with a spray paint can who's spraying your car. It doesn't tell you how you fit together with that person. Um, and we I don't need lectures on how people govern their behavior in the 1600s in Europe. I need to be able to judge our behavior right now, right where we are, and as divided and as separated as we are right now. We have to have ways of pulling ourselves together. And we've been doing that. I mean, this is and Commonway has a great track record on how to pull people together. It's just that a lot of people don't want to do that anymore. Um, I'll be talking about that track record in a workshop that I'm putting together for this month in a couple of weeks. I'll tell you more about that in a bit. However, right now, we're going to switch our gears toward doing our catalyst meditation.